Hi, I'm Jennifer from the Worcester branch of the Wayne County Public Library. As we celebrate Black History Month, I'd like to share with you a few good books that offer a deeper understanding of the struggle Black Americans faced in the 1960s when fighting for their constitutional right to vote, and where things stand today with those rights. Though the 15th Amendment to the U.S. Constitution prohibited denying the right to vote on the basis of race, many places in the country instituted literacy tests and other barriers to Black voter registration. And many of the protests in the mid-1960s, including the famous Selma to Montgomery March, focused on the demand for an end to discrimination in voting rights. One of the key leaders in this push for voting rights was the late Representative John Lewis, who chaired the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. He shared his own story in a 3-volume graphic memoir set called March, covering how he came to practice nonviolent activism and how his early efforts in desegregating lunch counters and buses led to his hard work to help the Black community overcome the obstacles to voter registration. Lewis's story takes a straightforward approach to explaining the brutality that he and others faced in their protests, but the story relies on the grayscale drawings to show that violent response. The historical narrative is framed by glimpses of Representative Lewis as an elder statesman participating in the inauguration of the first Black president, Barack Obama, and it reveals Lewis's pride at how far the nation had progressed in civil rights. It's a painful story, but a necessary one to understand the civil rights movement from the perspective of one of its key players. That same period of history is also covered in the new biography, His Truth is Marching On, John Lewis and the Power of Hope, by Pulitzer Prize-winning author John Meacham. Meacham repeats many of the same conversations and anecdotes, but places them within additional historical contexts about the political climate. But 55 years after the Voting Rights Act, where do things stand now? 2 recent books make it clear that the voting rights Black Americans fought so hard for in the 1960s have been eroded in practice. While Black voter registration is still considerably higher than in the pre-Voting Rights Act days, many states have implemented legislation that circumvents that national law, and they have effectively suppressed the votes of Black Americans and other minority groups. The book Give Us the Ballot by Berman provides a detailed history from 1965 to 2015, the book's publication date, of how states pushed back against the Voting Rights Act from the very start. The initial efforts after the act raised the number of registered Black voters by over 300,000 in the first year alone, and Black Americans stood for election in county, city, state, and national offices almost immediately. The pushback against those efforts started almost immediately as well, coming from all levels of government. Cities tried changing polling places to make it more difficult for Black citizens to vote, and states filed legal complaints all the way to the Supreme Court to challenge sections of the Voting Rights Act. And while those first attempts at rolling back the vote were unsuccessful, the changing political climate and composition of the courts over the following decades led to a gradual erosion of the landmark law. This award-winning book covers a half-century of political maneuvering and legal wrangling, with plenty of archival research and interviews with key figures. In One Person, No Vote, author Carol Anderson brings this history up to date by focusing on the many ways that states have restricted voting, especially throughout the past decade. She points to a 2013 Supreme Court decision known as the Shelby ruling, a decision which gutted a key part of the 1965 Act and details a lengthy, well-researched list of the many ways that state election officials continue to suppress the vote. From gerrymandering to photo ID requirements to poll closures and more, Anderson outlines the many ways that states have essentially stripped citizens of their rights by making it nearly impossible to vote. And while Black voters are disproportionately affected by these changes, Anderson points out that other groups, from Asian and Hispanic Americans to those voters living in poverty, are also at risk. The book is rich in footnotes and research, as well as details about laws and court decisions. So if you enjoy digging into books about politics, you'll want to check out this book as well. All of these books are part of the collection here at Worcester, and you can request them by calling us at the reference desk. You can also find the ebook versions of all of the books on Overdrive, as well as e-audiobook versions of both His Truth is Marching On and Give Us the Ballot. Happy reading and happy Black History Month.